Evening, everybody. I hope everybody's well. Thank you for joining me. It was a bit of a privilege to be invited. Um, I'll try and get through. I haven't dry ran the timing, so we'll see how we get on. First things first, the most important part of any primary survey. Are there any other fire and rescue service in the room? Because I'm hoping there's a lot of healthcare professionals. And a little very minor disclaimer. I had nothing to do with Grenfell, but as far as dynamic incident resolution goes, Grenfell kind of stands there for most people when they think about the fire and rescue service. Disclaimers, nothing new to most people in the room. Any CPD activity, changes in practice should not be based solely on any of the content within my presentation. I've made every effort to make sure my information's accurate, but your own due diligence is always recommended. And I've tried to make sure that my content reflects what I know to be current practice, but the nature of the topic, my own experiences and understanding will invariably impact on my delivery. And I have no conflict of interests to declare. Chatham House rule, this isn't going to be new to most people that have done similar sort of webinars, but feel free to use the information, just don't disclose it to come from me or any other participant that may take part at any point. So who am I? What brought me to being here now? So in 2007, I joined West Midlands Fire Service. I did time as a firefighter, predominantly spent my time as a crew commander. Did a stint at a watch commander level, but I finished as a crew commander to move into my current job. I qualified as a paramedic from Worcester Uni on a foundation degree, 17 to 19, and I've held paramedic reg since August 2019, working for West Midlands Ambulance Service, one shift a week, topped up to BSc 2020 to 2021. And since September 2022, I've been the paramedic lead for Hereford and Worcester Fire and Rescue Service. I'm not going to over-labour the point here. The key thing is that I imagine most people are familiar with Jessup. It pretty much underpins everything that we do. Having delivered a number of Jessup Instant Commander courses and been on them, the person that sits there and says, oh, well, we're fire, so we'll put the fire out. Revisiting Jessup persistently throughout this probably isn't going to give people what they need. People know that the fire service put fires out, the ambulance service treat casualties. So this content, the Jessup and the methane, everything else underpins the joint working, but I'm going to try and steer clear of just going back to it repeatedly because I don't think anybody gains from that. It's the ins and outs that people want to get, I hope, anyway. So the priorities in rescue and extrication, again, the centre of that Jessup, you know, working together to reduce harm, save lives. The biggest priority, life. After that, property. And finally, the environment. And it's gone through various iterations, but there's a firefighter maxim that comes from the National Fire Chiefs Council. Basically, it says that at every instant, the greater the potential benefit of fire and rescue actions, the greater the risk will be accepted by commanders and firefighters. Activities that present a high risk to safety are limited to those that have the potential to save life or to prevent rapid and significant escalation of the incident. Previously, it used to be something along the lines of, we will risk a lot to save savable life. We'll risk a little to save savable property, but we won't risk anything to save that that's already lost. So when we're framing what our priorities are, we're going to be looking to save life, protect property, and then protect the environment. I try to think about the best frame to hang my webinar on, and it kind of made sense to go for national operational guidance, or at least key components of it. The NOG can be compared to JR Calc for our ambulance service colleagues. It features guidance on operations, instant command, environmental protection, and guidance for our fire control colleagues. And it very much gives us the scope of what the hazards are, how we mitigate against them, what to do with particular risks. But from an inter-service or a discussion point this evening, I want to focus on the instant command aspects. This paragraph's taken directly from the NOG. Basically, the incident command system, it's an all hazards approach, provides a progressive, scalable and flexible system of operational command, control and organisation. the idea is that it gives the incident commander the ability to manage and fulfill their action plan in a controlled and systematic approach whilst resolving the incident. Key components, and I'll look at these in a little bit more detail. A clear, defined, and visible line or lines of command, manageable spans of control, a communications infrastructure, appropriate responsibility and authority, clearly defined and understood roles and responsibilities, and finally, sectorisation of the incident. And I basically thought that there aren't huge numbers of times where we might cross paths, house fires, RTCs, HAZChem. And actually, when I was a firefighter qualifying as a paramedic, what did I think was going to be most beneficial for my ambulance service colleagues? And I thought understanding how the fire service work might be the best way to go about doing that, which is kind of where I've aimed myself with my webinar. Hopefully, if anybody's got questions, feel free to drop them into the chat or bring them up at the end if I don't quite tick the boxes as we've gone through. No expense spared with the graphics on my webinar. Take your incident. We're going for what should hopefully, to a lot of people, look a bit like a factory. Your first resource is going to attend. On that is an officer. Every fire appliance has an officer, and the first officer in attendance is going to take on the role of the incident commander. They'll make their way from their vehicle, and they'll take up a view. If it's a small enough building, they'll do a 360. At some point, they're going to look to commit people to the building, so they're going to put in place a BA entry control operative. Their job is to look after the crews going into the building. Not in chronological order, but at some point, they're also going to want a safety officer. The incident's likely to expand, and they're going to put them in place to manage the safety. At this point, you've got very clear, defined, visible lines of command. The incident commander's got the tabard on. Everybody else has got tabards on. The BA crew will report to BA Echo. The safety officer will manage safety in the scene. And as it stands, the spans of control are quite manageable. A span of control refers to the number of people you're speaking to or dealing with. Incident commander at the moment speaks to the safety officer and the BA entry control operative. There may well be a key holder for the warehouse, etc., etc. Knowing that factories often increase in size and complexity, it's likely that our incident commander is going to put a sector commander in. They put them in charge of sector 1, which brings in our sectorisation of the incident. What it now means is the incident commander conveys his plan to the sector commander. He has a single span of control, and the sector commander then passes that on to the safety officer and the BA entry control operative in his sector. As the incident starts to get even bigger, we might get additional resources arrive, and we create a sector 2. The sectors are numbered generally on a traditional building, 1, 2, 3, 4, as we move clockwise around the building. What you can now see is that we've got 2 spans of control for the incident commander, which 2 or 3 in a very fast-paced developing situation is about as much as you'd want. And each of your sector commanders has 2 spans of control as well underneath them. This can scale though, and as the incident gets bigger, we've got 4 sectors in operation. We get multi-agency partners, the police, the ambulance service. You can now see that our incident commander has 4 spans of control on the fire ground as well as the 2 above him. Unless this was a really established incident, that's a lot to deal with. What he's more than likely going to do, move off to one side, maybe become slightly more remote, put an operations commander in place. Operations commander now has 4 spans of control. Incident commander's got 3. Well, he's technically got 5. He'd report up to the incident commander. But it's a lot more manageable. You can put other things in place that would further delegate the workload. But hopefully you can see how manageable spans of control, nobody's going to get overloaded. The communications infrastructure aspect. So one of the appliances doesn't necessarily move away from the scene, but it gets denoted as the command unit. There wasn't a red and white beacon available easily, so we've just gone for a red one, but there'll be a beacon somewhere on the appliance, red and white. It denotes that it's the command point. The incident commander sends his messages to the command point, and they get passed on to control. And as the scale of the incident increases, The command point is eventually replaced with a command unit, much like those by the police or the ambulance service. I think my tech is having a moment. We'll see if it catches up. There we go. This is a fairly heavy slide, so hopefully it's not too long. Appropriate responsibility and authority. A big take home is to always aim for the person with the incident commander tabard on. Within a 4-pump incident, best practice, that person is going to have the level of responsibility or authority of a crew commander or a watch commander. Either of these could technically be in charge of an incident up to 4 pumps. You may find a crew commander is in charge, even though watch commanders are in attendance. They'll be denoted by the surcoat, the tabard, the jerkin, whichever your terminology. Moving up to your level 2, you're looking at up to 8 pumps. You'll get a station commander in attendance. Beyond this, your group commander, up to 12 pumps, your level 3. And finally, if you're getting into the 16 pump and above range, an area commander. Just to round it off, your final helmet that you may see, very big, thick, chunky black band. This is going to be your assistant chief fire officer, deputy chief fire officer, or the chief fire officer when his rank markings drop in. The rank markings, depending on your locality, might not be as apparent. They might not display them on their fire kit. Outside of the obvious roles, you get, so we've already discussed the incident commander and operations commander at larger incidents, sector commanders, safety officers, command support act as runners, relaying information, collecting information, and your BA entry control operative looks after the crews that have committed in breathing apparatus. Any instance with mass decontam will likely be in that tabard, and tactical advisors will have theirs, likely with an insert in the back of their high-vis that denotes their role. Wildfire, TACAD, NILO, for instance. What could you expect from a house fire? Again, no expense spared. Our clearly defined and visible lines of command. Our incident commander here with his high-vis jerkin on that denotes him as the incident commander. Our entry control operative is on the right-hand side. There's a pump operator on the back. We've got some tape up. So the tape denotes our cordons. It restricts access to those people that need to be there. That's our inner cordon. Our outer cordon will be controlled by police colleagues, and they'll use their tape. Any prohibited areas are denoted by black and yellow tape. That may well be if there's a risk of falling tiles or building or structural collapse. Areas where you can't enter for any reason will be marked out and hopefully protected by a safety officer. The tape's come up a little bit early there, but your RTC, again, you can see 2 trucks. Your cordons are less likely to be obvious here because there's nowhere to generally attach tape to. You might find wing mirrors or the back of trucks attached to taped off with lampposts, but generally speaking, the physical barrier is your appliance, one either side. Hose wheels being drawn out. The area with the little red bit would be a trauma casualty care area, and the green square on the left-hand side would be an equipment dump. All the equipment you're likely to need is going to be found there, and your firefighters, when they don't have jobs, will group together, which is where the Daffodils comes from. Groups of firefighters have been known to appear to look like daffodils, and it was the easiest to cross-reference and keep my alliteration with my title. Manageable spans of control, likely to be just the incident commander relaying to a command point, directing the work. An incident this small, you may well not have sectorization. They're going to be appropriately responsible and have the necessary authority to deal with this incident, and everybody's going to know what everybody's doing. Increase to a slightly larger and take this as a motorway. And now you may well start to find that you may well find that there is fire and rescue tape. You may well have prohibited areas due to the nature of the spillage. Your hose reels being stretched out so that it can reach the whole of the area. Sectorization here might change. With your buildings, you'd go 1, 2, 3, 4 in a clockwise direction. Here, it might be lorry sector, spillage sector, van sector. So long as everybody understands, and once sectorization's been adopted, it's communicated and everybody's on the same page. MDT working for patient benefit. So what do I think, based on the information I've just given you, would be really useful for people to know when it comes to working with fire service partners? One of the biggest things I'd say, aim for the tabard, jerkin or surcoat rather than the helmet. People talk about aiming for the white helmet, which at bigger jobs, the more senior the person, the more they have on their helmet, and it will be a white helmet. But the incident commander is donated by the two-tone white and yellow high-vis. There may well be an operations commander. They may well direct you to them at some point, depending on where you're likely to be working. But in the first instance, aim for the incident commander, tabard, or surcoat. If you can't find them, generally speaking, aim for anybody else that happens to have a tabard on. They will form part of the command and control structure. They'll know where the incident commander is or who to speak to if you need to know what's going on or what actions are required in that particular moment. Bit of a Jessup thing, clear use of language, making sure all parties understanding terminology. You may well be surprised at the level of knowledge and understanding from a casualty care point of view that firefighters might have. They may well understand terminology when you give it to them with regards to understanding a tension pneumothorax or a pelvic fracture or a mid-shaft femur, hypotension, other words that as healthcare professionals will use quite frequently without thinking about it. But if you're using terminology, make sure everybody understands it. In that vein, if you need to go really simple, it might just be a case of, I'm concerned because my patient's big sick, or I'm not too concerned, I think they're little sick. We need to be sensitive about the way we talk if we're in the proximity of the casualty, but making sure everybody's on the same page about whether the casualty's poorly or not, and certainly how they're going to get their crew to do what you need them to. Terminology varies from fire service to fire service. Prior to moving over to Hereford and Worcester, West Mids only used rapid or controlled. Rapid was the out now, that is immediate for Hereford and Worcester. Make sure you understand what terminology they use so that you know how to use it as well, and have a discussion around what the plans are going to be. What do you want to see? Manage expectations. How do you want it to be done? Fire and rescue are really good at extricating the casualty, but may have limited understanding with regards to how is it that this casualty needs to come out? How poorly are they? How much control would you like? The exit project talks about any injured casualty needing to be treated as time dependent. They need to come out as quickly as possible. But what that looks like, you can speak to the fire service and say, how quickly can you get them out? Manage each other's expectations. I need them out in X amount of time or by such and such a time because X, Y, or Z is going to happen, and make sure everybody's understanding. And a big thing I'd say when you arrive at an incident, if fire and rescue are already in attendance, we don't run very often. Many a joke about coiled springs, sleeping through night shifts and such are going to rain down at the moment in people's minds, but we don't run very often. If you arrive at a job and you can see us moving hurriedly, it's a good indicator that there's something going on. Match that tempo. If you arrive at a house fire, load everything onto the stretcher. Your monitor, your standard go bag in West Mids, that's just green. Potentially your advanced life support, depending on the nature of the incident and how it looks like it might escalate. Suction, all the bits that you can carry comfortably without overdoing it. Pop on the stretcher and walk over with it. It looks better. I went to an incident I drove the truck there, and it was persons reported. It was a fire in a 3-story mid-terrace, and we were actively looking for people. I wasn't, but the crew inside were. And when the ambulance arrived, they had a walk over, and I said, "We're fairly confident there's people in there based on the reports we've been given. Be worth you having all your kit ready." And they loaded the stretcher and they brought it over to an appropriate place. And it got commented by the incident commander during the debrief that was a positive for them. He didn't realise I'd given the crew a nudge to say it might be worthwhile. Turns out there wasn't anybody in there, but it sets the tone. It gives fire an understanding that you aware of what's going on. You're gonna act accordingly if they get a casualty out, and you're also in a position to. The last thing you want is a casualty to be rescued from that sort of environment, and your stretcher's not there. You've got nowhere to put them. You've got to then consider scooping them off the floor to get them onto somewhere. If everything's good to go, you take all the kit off the stretcher. Fire can place the casualty onto the stretcher, and you can immediately get to work or move them to the ambulance if more appropriate. So yeah, if it looks like there's stuff going on, handle that accordingly. One of the key things that hopefully was going to be achieved from my webinar was what to do if you're first in attendance. The next couple of slides it's all based heavily on my own experiences. And for that reason, any individual finding themselves in a similar situation remains wholly responsible for their actions and inactions. I can't give examples for every possible situation, and I very much realise that there is every chance that somebody will arrive first because they'll pass the job. Police may well get called to something that turns out to be something else. Ambo might get called to a force entry that turns out to be a house fire in progress. If you're first in attendance, you're going to have to use your own judgment, dynamic risk assessment, and all the other bits and pieces. Use this to feed into that, but don't rely solely on it, because I did 15 years frontline firefighting. My bag of experience thankfully got quite full before my bag of luck ran out. As a gut sort of instinct, generally speaking, if it feels sketchy, it probably is sketchy. We've probably all been in situations where our gut tells us something's not quite right. There's a good chance it's going to feel like that if you're confronted with hazardous substances, house fires, or significant RTCs, and you're first in attendance. There's also a really good chance it's sketchier than you think it is. So if you think it's sketchy, there's probably a lot more going on, unless you've had significant experience in fire and rescue that you just don't think about because you wouldn't. I'm not going to think about things from a police point of view because I haven't had the exposure to that environment. When it comes to fires, what are some of the things that you can do or be mindful of if you were to arrive first? Ventilated fires, so those with the doors or windows open, are generally safer than unventilated. There's a big asterisk there because it's a prompt for me to say they're generally safer because the risks associated with backdraft, where a sudden increase in oxygen supply causes the fire to explode out at you. You know what you're getting, generally speaking, with a ventilated fire. You can see it developing. You have a good idea of what it looks like or how it develops. The fire triangle, as it used to be, has gone and has been replaced with the fire tetrahedron. So chain reaction has been included. The majority of house fires can be well contained by closing doors, by shutting down compartments, by not opening doors or windows, for instance. So if you are going to make your way into a building, consider doing so and shutting doors down on your way out. Precarious ways in make for even more precarious ways out. If you have a very open front door, if you need to withdraw because of safety, the easier that door was to get into, the safer it's going to be for you to get back out of. There are videos out there of people going in through windows and such. That's a very precarious way to find yourself having to get out of the building if anything happens to go wrong. Couple of videos. Hopefully the tech doesn't fail me and it works. And they're just to give you an idea of what fire can look like and some of the things that you can maybe be mindful of. So this incident was called in as a fire. We suspected a retaliation for an incident elsewhere. We're gaining access. This is one of those unventilated fires. All the compartments are closed down. And what you'll see is the amount of smoke and the difficulty with regards to gaining proper access without respiratory protection. I'm in breathing apparatus, so entering this environment from a respiratory point of view is fairly safe for me. The second instant, this video is a really good example of the difference that can be made by ventilating. If you look at the top window, you can just see the tiniest misting of smoke from the very top. That's effectively because the whole of the building's been pressurized. That window's only open a crack. It's considered a limited ventilation fire. You'll see that eventually, or a very short amount of time after the start of the video, the entry is gained via the front door. That basically allows oxygen to feed the fire, which increases the pressure. And the next time you see that top window, there's a good amount of fire exiting, smoke, sorry, not fire, exiting under pressure. Notice the windows through, and now all of a sudden that very dark, unpleasant black smoke's coming out. Oh, didn't mean to do that. It won't go back. From a point of view of if you're trying to gain access to that building, the smoke layer would be so ridiculously low, toxic and almost obnoxious, for want of a better word, that you wouldn't be able to enter. And that's why the risk with entering that sort of unventilated compartment is so much greater, because over a long period, the risk of an explosion increases, and it just the clarity and view for you to try and achieve something is not going to be great. This incident, limited ventilation again, but you'll be able to see what sort of a difference the fact that it's ventilated and your visibility is. We get there very early on at the beginning of this incident. My size of this incident is that it would quite quickly be knocked down with sufficient water. I've told my BA, my breathing apparatus crews, to get going. What we really need, though, is water. A little bit eager on my part, because I should be wearing gloves for the next bit, but it is what it is. That was caused by children within the property posting stuff into the toaster, and immediately above the toaster was a collection of incense and oils and other bits and pieces. And once they caught, they went really well. Hence the reaction when I first put water onto it, because it was a small enough fire. It it was well it was easy enough to put out with the amount of water that we've got available. If I was thinking about entering that property because people had been reported upstairs, pulling the kitchen door to would have kept that quite well contained, and allow you to do what you need to do. If you get to RTCs, vehicles in all positions are generally stable enough for access to a casualty requiring a life-saving intervention. Now, arguably, if the vehicle's on its side, your access is going to be limited, but they're not likely to topple over. It takes an awful lot to topple a car on its side, and a car on its roof is arguably more stable than a car on its wheels, assuming it's not an electric vehicle. The weight of the engine will keep it bonnet down and allow you to gain access. By life-saving intervention, I mean opening an airway, assessing for cat hem, although managing it in that situation is likely to be fairly difficult. Identifying features of other vehicles. Vehicles rarely burst into flames. There's always an exception to the rule. You can find examples on YouTube of there's a particular famous one of a lorry crashing on a motorway, and it bursts into flames and explodes. But if you can smell petrol fuel, or you can see spilled fluids, be very cautious. Anything carrying hazardous substances is going to display that orange placard, the rectangle to the front, and the HazChem placards to the side and the rear. We can see them in this picture to the front of this petrol tanker, and on the right-hand side of it, there'll also be one on the rear. Other things to be mindful of, if you were to remember, the E, so this has Chem placard, gives you various pieces of information. The 3YE is an emergency action code. The 3 relates to the firefighting medium, so a coarse spray, a fine spray, foam, or a dry agent. Y relates to the level of personal protective equipment. E relates to a public safety hazard. It used to be referred to as a prompt for evacuation. Now it's a public safety hazard. If you happen to see a vehicle that's involved displaying the E after any of the letters, it's worth noting that it's a public safety hazard, and you want to keep people at a distance. The 1203 is the UN code, which helps to identify the material, specialist advice and the company providing it, and then the placard or the warning diamond to say what's being carried. The ERG, there's an app for this. If it's worth having. I personally have a folder with all of my work apps in it. I've got an ambulance folder and a fire service folder. You can go on and you can search by that number, or you can look for generic information based on flammable liquids or anything you can't identify, and it will tell you actions for first aid or casualty care, isolation distances, lots of other bits and pieces. It's a worthwhile app to get if you're curious about what it might be that people are going to benefit from, or what sort of immediate actions are going to be needed, particularly in the absence of fire and rescue. A couple of questions before I move on. Is there any rule for ambulance crews to be aware of in RTCs with airbags, please? Yeah, so airbags, there's a 5, 10 and 20 rule, relates to inches. And essentially, the way I personally describe this when I'm talking to students and other people is, imagine yourself sitting in the driver's seat. Take your hand. Everybody's hand's different, but generally speaking, my hand is about right. If I hold my hand up and splay my fingers, from the tip of my thumb to the tip of my little finger is give or take 5 to 6 inches. Now, that hand can be used to grab up to the handhold in the that runs over the roof. So the curtain airbag that's up in that top right of the roof, you need to leave about 5 inches between that space and you. The steering wheel can you can get both of your hands on that space. So one goes up to the top right. You can put both hands on the steering wheel. So you want to be leaving 10 inches from the steering wheel to wherever you put yourself. And then if you imagine your hands and the patient hands, or the passenger's hand, sorry, makes 20 inches, the passenger airbag should have a 20-inch gap between it. It's a fairly big airbag. So from where you're seated, one hand can reach up, so 5 inches to the curtain, 10 inches because both hands can go onto the steering wheel, and then your 10 plus your passenger's 10 gives you 20 for your dashboard or passenger airbag. So hopefully that makes sense. The app has already been answered elsewhere. It's the ERG 2020. If you search emergency response guidebook or ERG 2020, it tends to come up. I'm an Android, and that's what it would come up with for me. Electric car instance, are they more likely to burst into flames due to batteries? They're not more likely to burst into flames, but they're very hazardous if they do. If they're involved in fire, you want to keep your distance. And if damaged lithium-ion batteries can suffer from what's referred to as thermal runaway, so they continue to heat up until they burst into flames. There's a really big national piece of work going on with regards to how we deal with them, with the advice effectively being they need to be submerged, which is not easy to do when you think about the size of a vehicle. And at the moment, it's the advice is just copious amounts of water. If you suspect it's an electric vehicle, you identify the green number plate, keep your distance. They're not more likely necessarily to burst into flames, but if there's a risk of the battery being damaged, the risk if they do start to get that thermal runaway is quite significant. So back to my slides. What would Fire and Rescue Service want from healthcare providers or others? I went out and I spoke to colleagues in Hereford and Worcester, used my own past experiences, and tried to put a few bits and pieces together for anybody else to be mindful of when they arrive at a scene. The vast majority of Fire and Rescue Service personnel are willing and able, but they don't know our ambulances or our vehicles or our kit as well as we do. So clear and direct instructions with a confirmation of understanding. All Fire and Rescue Services personnel should be competent in basic life support and AED. That said, double check they're happy with what you're asking them to do if you work in a resus. If you want them to fetch things from your ambulance, give them really clear direction. You know, in WMFS, our blankets are in and up on the left-hand side. So going through the back doors, it's up on the left-hand side. You should see it about halfway down the ambulance. If you want them to fetch the stretcher, if your stretcher has a foot pedal, let them know there's a foot pedal. They need to stamp on that and the stretcher will release itself. They'll be more than willing to go and find things, particularly if it's going to be for the benefit of the casualty, but they're not going to be familiar with the inside of an ambulance unless they happen to also work for the ambulance service. There are a few of us out there, but we're fairly few and far between. The next one, I hear from a lot of my crews, paramedics don't want to listen to our handover. I try to relay to crews the fact that when healthcare professionals arrive at the scene of RTC, there's an awful lot going through their heads. My drip stand reference from my title is in reference to the fact that firefighters often get given the task of I've cannulated the patient, can you just hold these fluids? And they'll do that really well, much like my first point. Not that we need too much clear and direct instruction when it comes to holding fluids, but firefighters can do much more, and they've been with the casualty for potentially a significant amount of time. They have information they could give you. And I tried to explain that decent trauma jobs don't come along very often. It might be that your ambulance crew are seeing that for the first time and their heads racing. They aren't 100% certain what's going on, what they need to be aware of, and they potentially have lost some of their bandwidth and their ability to listen to handover. That said, when your firefighter starts giving his handover and it seems uncoordinated, might be worth just giving them 30 to 60 seconds to generate a coherent handover. I can certainly speak for Hereford and Worcester and West Mids when I say that they're familiar with ATMIST, but we generally surprise firefighters. They'll know we're coming, but they don't practice handover, or they're not as practiced as healthcare professionals. I'll hand over anything from 4 to 8 patients a day when I work on an ambulance, depending on my weight outside hospitals and other bits and pieces. Um, I'm very familiar, and I could probably spin an ATMIST off the top of my head because I've been doing it for long enough. But we just rock up at instance when we're wearing green, and the firefighter goes from looking after the casualty to being confronted with somebody that wants to know what's going on. And because they're not so practiced, they might fumble their words a little bit in the beginning. So there's other things we can be doing in the first 30 or 60 seconds. We'll be eyeballing the casualty anyway, no doubt, working out how quickly we might want to intervene or take over casualty care. So give them 30 to 60 seconds. Say, look, work on your handover. Let me know what it is. I'm just going to have a look around or work out what's going on. And hopefully they'll come up with an ATMIS for you or a handover. If not, point them in the right direction with regards to who are you concerned about? Why are you concerned? Have they got better or have they got worse since you've been with them? Have any of your treatments or interventions made a difference? Coax the information out of them because they'll have it. And it's really useful information, even if it's just they're worse than when I got to them, can be a good indicator of the direction that the casualties tracking at that point. If you're first on scene and you're waiting for fire, accurate and timely information can be really useful. I went and spoke to one of our incident command leads at Hereford and Worcester to try and work out what was going to be beneficial or useful. And we both had situations where we had turned up to incidents thinking we were turning up to make safe. And it turned out that there were quite poorly casualties on our arrival. So it helps that mindset for us matching your tempo. If we know that you've got a casualty, that it's persons reported, we're going to bear that in mind when we arrive. We're going to be suitably prepared. We've mentally put ourselves into the space to handle casualties. My situation, I was mobilised to what came through as a hit and run. And to this day, I can't understand why I didn't expect there to not be a casualty. But it didn't come through to us as RTC persons reported. We were the only appliance going, which again made me think I was going to go and make safe. And when I arrived, there was a casualty with open bilateral tib-fib fractures in the care of ambulance. But I was not expecting it. Completely blindsided me. From a fire point of view, there wasn't much to do. The involved vehicles, one was parked, one had crashed into that and then into the patient who'd been a pedestrian. The scene was easy to manage, and then I could help with casualty care, kind of put my paramedic hat on to support the crew because it was quite a complex patient. But it caught me off guard. Had I known that it was persons reported, I could have put myself into that headspace, and it would have been much better for me. And have a consideration for the fact that you're going to be viewed as the incident commander if you're the first there, even if that wouldn't normally be your role. I'm talking here to your frontline crews on double crewed ambulances, your paramedic tech, your double para, potentially even tech or tech student, para student, whatever the combination. Incident command is not drilled into the ambulance service like it is the fire service. There is an incident commander on every fire vehicle, with very limited exceptions. But every fire engine that arrives should have a level 1 incident commander on it. If you arrive on an ambulance, they're going to look for direction from an ambulance point of view from the most senior person or the person that they can identify. If you wouldn't normally be the incident commander, explain what your role actually is or how you're going to facilitate the resolution of the incident until an ops manager arrives, just so that everybody's on the same page. It helps because they'll know that when somebody else arrives, they're going to be getting the incident command stuff from them. What are my key take homes? Hopefully, we've not done too badly. Um, the tabard, the surcoat, or the jerkin is the thing to aim for, not the helmet. If you can find the incident commander, great. But if not, anybody with something that identifies who they are will form part of the instant command and control structure or system, and they'll be able to point you in the right direction. If you arrive and you can see a vehicle with that flashing white and red beacon, that's a good place to start because they're the command point or the command unit. They will know what's going on. They'll be able to point you in the right direction. In theory, they should also be the only vehicle with its blue lights on. So aim for that one as a good point. Make your role known, even if it's only going to be temporary. If you're an interim instant commander, because you're the paramedic on a DCA, let them know that you're not there as an instant commander, but you'll technically fulfill the role, passing information, interagency liaison until the ambulance ops commander or whatever they're referred to, OM, ops manager, arrives. From being first on scene, and doing things without the fire service being in attendance, I don't want anybody to be in a position where they have to do stuff because the fire service aren't there, but invariably it's going to happen. There was a video came out within the last 12 months, I think, of police officers responding to a guy who held his family hostage with a knife and set fire to the bedroom. We don't really ever want to be in a position, but there's a chance it might happen. Do as much as you think you can whilst taking on as little risk as possible. If there's nobody in the building that's on fire, close the compartments down, shut the front door, remove people. If you think you need to effect a rescue, do as much as you can get away with whilst exposing yourself to as little risk as possible. Trust your gut, but appreciate its limitations. My gut is informed by my training and my experience. Everybody else's gut's going to be the same. Those of you that have been paramedics for longer than I have been, will have a better gut from a healthcare point of view. But appreciate that if you're assessing a scene for hazardous substances or an RTC or a fire, unless you've had particular experience or training, you've not got as big a picture as you'd like to have. So those sketchy situations are probably sketchier than they think they are. And if you're taking a risk aware point of view, it's great if it goes well, but if it doesn't, it's awkward conversations with your family and friends. So bear that in mind. My credentials, if anybody wants those, that's my Hereford and Worcester email address and my Hereford and Worcester contact number. Feel free, generally speaking, I'm on leave for the next week or so, so you won't get a response, but feel free to drop me an email if you have further questions that aren't able to be answered here, or any collaboration, inter-service or interagency working. We're as far as I'm aware, the first fire service to have a paramedic-led training team. So if you want us to get involved with bits and pieces, or you want to see how we can work alongside each other, geographical restrictions are going to apply within reason, but we're more than happy to get out there and help with various bits and pieces if anybody thinks it's beneficial. So reach out. At some point, I might have to say no to some of you, but we want to do what we can for the wider world, given my quite fortunate position to be dual skilled in a post that really pushes for paramedic level instruction in a fire service capacity.